is Bitcoin anonymous? Wow. Now, this is a great question. So, yes. Now, how you use Bitcoin and in order to remain anonymous is important. And so, if let's, for example, like we spoke earlier about how difficult the incumbents are making the on-ramps to the Bitcoin network, and they ask for driving licenses and addresses, etc. And one of the reasons they do that is because, let's say I'm moving dollars from an Australian bank account to an Australian Bitcoin exchange, and that Bitcoin exchange, I have an account and I have a specific Bitcoin wallet within that account, and then I send that Bitcoin to my own self-custody. Now, that's a data point, right? Where a sophisticated player can say, okay, we know that Jake had this account, he moved this money into that account, and then he sent it to this address here. So we can be pretty confident that this address over here is his. And that address is obviously a public address. You can search every address at any time. So you'll be able to see exactly how much Bitcoin is in there if you had that address now. And then you'll also be able to see where that address sends anything ever. So in a way, they've been very smart about how they've created the transfer of capital into Bitcoin, because sophisticated enough players are able to track where all the capital moves. Now, in that sense, Bitcoin's not anonymous. And that's why you've got to be so careful. Like when you sign up with a hardware wallet provider, like Ledger, for example, a very famous issue, they had their contact lists leaked. And so every email address that's ever signed up with Ledger is now, available for purchase, and people get phishing scams all the time. But if then someone was able to connect those email addresses with the wallets that were used, you'll then be able to track this person's Bitcoin activity. And so you have to be really careful with this. To some degree, in my view, there's just not all that much you can do about it. And I would take Bitcoin and self-custody with a paper trail over any other asset allocation you can possibly get your hands on, because they all have paper trails already, right? But Bitcoin in the true sense was created as a pseudonymous network, in that you can see the public address. You can see how much is in the address. You can see where it's come from. You can see where it's going to go to when it moves, but you don't know who controls that wallet. You don't know who controls that address. And that's the key. It's like having transparency on a macro level, but you don't have the micro knowledge of like who owns what. Specifically, like this person lives in this country at this address. And that's important because actually it's just money. I don't need to know like everything about the person that's sending me their Bitcoin. As long as they send me Bitcoin and I can see the transaction settle on the Bitcoin blockchain and it arrives in my address, I actually don't care who that other person is. And I think that's very important from like a trading perspective. We want to create as smooth as possible a scenario where the transactions between parties is as fast as possible with as little friction as possible. And therefore, if it's just sound money, that's all you need. You don't need to know someone's address and someone's, spouse and how many kids they've got. It doesn't fucking matter at all. But yes, in theory, Bitcoin is anonymous, but people get caught out all the time, either with, identity leaks or these governments. They've all collected a massive amount of information on us, and so we've got to be super careful. I guess the last thing to mention with that being the ability to have a non-KYC Bitcoin stack. And I mentioned before, so Bitcoin miners get paid in virgin coins. And so you can, in theory, if you find a Bitcoin miner, buy Bitcoin straight off them. And then there's no paper trail, especially if they are, off-grid home miners that, aren't stock listed businesses. They can sell you Bitcoin. And so you could spin up a Bitcoin wallet that doesn't require any kind of KYC, and you could then have a non-KYC Bitcoin stack, which that means it's anonymous, right? If someone had the address, they could find out how much Bitcoin was in it, but no one would know who actually controls it. So this is a bit of a gray area. And actually, going back to what we talked about earlier with Andrew Bailey and Cash, with like backwards privacy and forwards privacy. This is a really important point about anonymity and the ability to Bitcoin to act as cash. And one of the reasons why it's difficult for it to actually do that in practice is because the on-ramps to Bitcoin are so heavily guarded, right? It's just like, give us all your information, you can join this thing, no problem. But on the way through, it's like, well, one day they might use that against you in some nefarious way. Who knows? I personally, I would like to think that what with the rapid adoption of technology generally, it's something called the Overton window. It's very interesting, where for a long time, owning Bitcoin in a portfolio was career suicide. But at some point, the performance becomes out of proportion, and therefore it becomes career suicide not to own it. And it's like, where is that time? When is that space? When do people actually go like, do you know what? I've got to just own this thing now. And at some point, and we're already seeing this in the States, right, where certain states are starting to take Bitcoin on the balance sheet. There is the strategic Bitcoin reserve. The federal government's also talking about a sovereign wealth fund, which will own Bitcoin. Like, the politicians that are actually making the shots, they will own Bitcoin themselves. And so a lot of this hostile Bitcoin legislation and stance, and even the gray areas about, like, is it legal? Like the question we asked, like that will all just fall away. And with any luck, the idea of capital gains on Bitcoin in the future, I think, is completely insane. That will be seen as absolutely like the dark ages, right? Governments taking purchasing power increases of Bitcoin. It's mad because it's just money. And I think the same will apply with the anonymous side of it. It's like, no, you guys just get on and use it, and the benefits of it will far outweigh the surveillance that's currently going on.